All right, good day to you all. This is Mr. Rappaport, and I'm going to share with you information from your AMSCO book from 3.1 and 3.2, which is European, East Asian, and Gunpowder Empires Expand. That's 3.1. And then how these different empires are administered. That's 3.2. So this video will just focus on 3.1. So first things first, go ahead and jot down European, East Asian, and Gunpowder Empires Expand. And then your summary below. States expand their territorial control and the control they have over their citizens. All right, here is the vocabulary. Ming Dynasty. This Chinese dynasty overthrew the occupation of the nomadic Mongols, only to be later conquered by another group of nomads from Manchuria. The Manchu are Sinified, made more Chinese, ethnic group of former nomads who conquered the Ming Dynasty. The Qing Dynasty is a Manchu-led Chinese dynasty that led it to its greatest extent. Kangxi, the third Qing emperor, is responsible for the great deal of their expansion. Emperor Qianlong led the Qing during their height. Now, we're going to change continents. The Gutenberg printing press from Germany. This invention was created by improving upon technologies developed in Song Dynasty China and resulted in increased literacy rates in Western Europe. That's an understatement. We'll get to its influence more in the future. Gunpowder empires are Turkic, formerly nomadic states that used gunpowder to expand militarily. Ottoman Empire, Gunpowder Empire in Anatolia, which is now Turkey, that controlled Mediterranean trade. The Shah is king or emperor in Persian. Language of Persia is called Farsi. And the Safavid Empire is a gunpowder empire in Central Asia in the area that is now Iran. Moving right along. We have the Mughal Empire, gunpowder empire that eventually controlled most of South Asia, what today is the country of India and Pakistan and also Bangladesh. There's the Ghazi ideal. The Ghazi is the name for the ideal warrior who's going to wage a holy war. So it's both a warrior's name, not a warrior like a personal warrior, but it's the name for a warrior who follows the Islamic code of behavior used by the Timurids, but also by early Ottomans and other Turkic groups. Castes over in South Asia, like India, are social groups defined within Hinduism. We'll get more into that later. Ivan IV is the person responsible for the expansion of the Russian Empire, and his military conquest was ensured by the use of gunpowder. Tamerlane is kind of the last great nomadic conqueror. He's a Turkic leader, got to fix that little typo there, so don't write TRU, it's TUR, who expanded after the fragmentation of the Mongol Khanates. Again, he's the last sort of major, big, scary guy to bust out of Central Asia and freak out all the settled communities. Suleiman I is the leader of the Ottoman Empire during its height, and Ismail is the first leader of the Safavid dynasty. You have Shah Abbas I, who presided over the Safavid Empire at its height, and then you have Akbar, the founder of the Mughals. All right, so definitely pause for a bit, jot down these words, and then we shall continue. All right, let's start off with Europe. So, summary for this section is that European states centralized through the wealth of their colonies. So, 1450 is generally considered to be the end of the medieval period. Things start to tighten up in terms of states. So, whereas during the feudal period and medieval period, you had lots of different lords and lots of different manors, and everyone's kind of doing their own thing in their own kingdom. In the mid to late 1400s, you start to see states forming and countries forming, looking a little bit more like what it does today. So a huge part of that, or part of European history at this time, is the Gutenberg printing press, which leads to an explosion of literacy, and everyone goes around and wants to read the Bible, and that has huge effects on the influence of the Catholic Church. But again, we'll get to that in the future. At this time, monarchs are still continuing to centralize political power within their states. So again, you have states forming and becoming stronger. They're gaining wealth from overseas possessions, which we'll talk about in the future unit, and they use this wealth to centralize. So what that means is they've got stronger militaries, they're increasing their security, which means that people don't need their local lord to be secure because they've got the national army, and so feudalism becomes obsolete. And bureaucracies start to grow, which means that people who do the work of the government, like, say, collecting taxes, there get to be more systems for organizing all of that and keeping it more stable. So you've got rising families taking over large countries. You've got the Tudors in England, the Valois in France. You have Isabella and Ferdinand. That says France, but it should say Spain. Isabella and Ferdinand in Spain. In fact, it can't hurt. Let's take this. Let's change it. We don't want to lead to more confusion. Isabella and Ferdinand in Spain. All right. Next, in Russia, which is kind of half in Europe and half in Asia, we're going to mostly talk about the European part. But the summary for this section is that Russia makes massive territorial gains and consolidates control behind strong leaders. So Russia, as I said before, straddles Asia and Europe, but generally, culturally, it's more linked to Europe. Mr. Jennings put in this little PowerPoint that it's a Mongol Viking hybrid state. I'll ask him more about that because I don't want to say the wrong thing. All right, Ivan IV is the founding leader of the new Russian state. And a big thing they do is they get control of the Volga area. So let me show you where the Volga area is so you have some idea what I'm talking about. The Volga is over here, and it's the river that runs down there. It gets into the Black Sea area and to the Caspian Sea area. And once the Russians control that, they've got a lot more influence over this part of the world instead of just being stuck kind of in this little spot up here. All right, let's get back down to it. So in order to conquer the Volga area, the Stroganovs, the leaders of Russia at the time, they hired these peasant warriors known as Cossacks. The Cossacks go down, they conquer the Volga region, and then later it hooks Russia into this land-based trade of the Silk Road. Russia also expands eastward, driven by the fur trade, and they fight indigenous tribes in that area, and little by little they convert them to Orthodox Christianity, and they get to the Pacific by 1639. And again, let me show you what that looks like. You've got Russia expanding from basically like this area. They're going all the way west, and they're conquering indigenous groups in this very cold area. And then finally, they reach the Pacific Ocean. All right. Moving right along, in East Asia, summary for your East Asia section is that the Ming and the Qing expand China's influence to its greatest extent ever. The Ming Dynasty controls China for 300 years, and it's an interesting period of time. But your AMSCO book gives them 3 paragraphs. Mr. Jennings says, #injustice. All right, so some things you should know. The Ming Dynasty has a relationship with European explorers. They're worried about invaders from the north, so they restore the Great Wall of China. Then in the northeast, the Manchus invade China and overthrow the Ming Dynasty. And we're going to continue our injustice by moving right along. But if you take a look over here, this is the area that is referred to as Manchuria, and the Manchus come down and take over and put an end to the Ming Dynasty. All right, next, Emperor Kangxi is the 3rd Qing emperor, and under the Qing dynasty, they expand and get into Taiwan, Tibet, Mongolia, Central Asia. Let's just get a little more mappage. So again, you've got Taiwan, you've got Tibet over here, you've got Mongolia up there, you've got Central Asia kind of over here. So China is expanding during this time. All right, now, Emperor Qianlong conquered Xinjiang, which is a Muslim-majority region, which has been in the news a lot the past year because of the treatment of the Uyghur ethnic minority. So that's still an area that's kind of hot in the news. This leader is often seen as the leader during the peak of the Qin dynasty. All right, there are some conflicts with the West. The Chinese in general are worried about the influence of Europe. They don't really want Christianity coming in. They don't really want any unfair trade practices to happen, and they really don't feel like Europe has anything to offer them. And so, Britain's saying, hey, Chinese, we love your products, we want your porcelain, we want your tea. And China is like, you don't have anything we really want. We'd rather not trade with you. We're going to try to kind of stay out of it and just do our own thing. We're big, we're China, we have everything we need, we're fine. During this time, there is some unrest, and there's something called the White Lotus Rebellion, and the Qing brutally repress that rebellion and kill, I think, 100,000 people. All right, so in Section E, the rise of gunpowder empires. Summary here is that gunpowder empires are nomadic states that become sedentary and develop strong centralized states. So again, you've got people who used to be more seasonally moving, following their herds, and they settle down and develop these large empires. So all of them together, the gunpowder empires, what they have in common is they're all descended from Turkic nomads, from the Turkic area of the world. And so we're talking about on the map, generally, Let's zoom out a little bit. So here's the modern day country of Turkey, but Turkic people exist kind of all through this area. All right. So moving back over here. So they're descended from Turkic nomads. They speak Turkic languages. They take advantage of a power vacuum from the collapse of the Mongol states. If you remember, after Genghis Khan's grandchildren can't sort of figure out how to keep the empire together, the Mongol Empire collapses into these 4 different states, and then gradually those collapse even more. And they all have in common that they use gunpowder. And gunpowder, you may ask, what's with the deal with the gunpowder? The gunpowder enables people to make cannons and artillery, and they're using these to expand their empires in new ways. So, here we go. The rise of Tamerlane. We have here the last great nomadic conqueror. He's considered to be a Ghazi. He emphasizes his warrior life and Islam. He's very violent toward Hindus in the conquest of northwestern South Asia. So as he goes in toward the area that's kind of now Pakistan, he is very violent over there. Kind of scares everyone, like, oh, who's this crazy nomadic conqueror? Kind of like the second coming of Genghis Khan or something, but not a Mongol. But he did also fund and encourage the arts. And his successor, Babur, ends up founding this very famous dynasty in India called the Mughals, which we'll get to soon. The Ottoman Empire, fascinating people, very, very fascinating empire. Hopefully we'll learn more about it in class, but the short version is the Ottomans extend control and threaten European and other gunpowder states. They're focused in Anatolia, but later they spread to control the Eastern Mediterranean, Southern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Let me show you some mappage. So over here, we've got the Ottoman Empire. They start over here, kind of in central Turkey, and then they expand this way. And they expand that way, and then they expand down this way into the Holy Land, and they expand across North Africa, and then they expand into Bulgaria. But they still haven't conquered Istanbul because Istanbul has these huge famous walls and it can't be conquered. But very important is Istanbul, because if you zoom in really, really, really close, you can see they control the Bosphorus Strait, which connects basically the Aegean Sea, which is really the Mediterranean Sea, to the Black Sea. So anybody up here who wants to get down there has got to pass through there. So at the time, the city's called Constantinople, and the Ottomans have trouble conquering it, but they do conquer over here, and they conquer over there. So poor little Constantinople is kind of sitting in the middle, and then eventually it'll be conquered. We'll get to that very soon. So, there we are. We're there already. So they spread the control to the Eastern Mediterranean, Southern Europe, Middle East, and North Africa. Mehmed II is the Ottoman Empire who finally conquers Constantinople with these massive cannons. I don't want you to be distracted from your notes, but if you pause the notes and Google pictures of the cannons they used to conquer Constantinople, they're very, very cool. They were like the biggest, most powerful cannons at the time, and they were able to expand into the Black Sea area. Suleiman I, or Suleiman the Magnificent as he is known, also very cool pictures of him if you want to pause and Google. He led the Ottomans to their greatest extent territorially. He advanced all the way into Vienna, so he's like knocking on the doors of Europe, but that conquest failed, and also lost an important battle at Rhodes, and so they're sort of stopped from pushing too far into Europe. They slow their expansion, and then as Europe industrializes, they begin to have weapons to be able to fight off the Ottomans, and the Ottoman Empire starts to decline in like the 1800s, and then in 1922 it collapses because it's on the wrong side, or the losing side, of World War I. The Safavids. All right, they're a gunpowder state led by Shia Islam. You might be asking yourself, what is Shia Islam? Maybe you already know, but it's a minority sect within Islam. They believe that the people who were in charge of the Muslim holy sites, the caliphs, they believed that after a while, the wrong people were being chosen, and the people who should be in charge of Islam should be direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, and so they break off from what's called Sunni Islam, and these folks form the Safavid Empire. So, let's see. Ismail, their leader, comes from this tiny country of Ardabil, and it's kind of an unlikely spot to found an empire. Like, it's just a small place. But he pops out, conquers all of Iran, and is proclaimed Shah, or king. And let's look at a map over here. So we're talking about now this area. Iran, also known as Persia, that's the seat of the Safavid Empire. And you can see today all these folks over here, mostly, except for Lebanon, they're mostly Sunni Islam, Sunni Muslims over here, they follow Sunni Islam, and over here they are Shia, and there's conflicts with that even today. All right, so the first Shah Abbas the first, used Christian soldiers pressed into service from Georgia and Russia. So he basically takes people from the country near Russia called Georgia, and takes Christians from there, impresses them into service, forces them to serve, helps to conquer the empire. Again, as I said before, the Safavids are Shia, and they say we are legitimate rulers because we follow the correct form of Islam. And they're able to convert most Muslims in the region to Shia Islam. They ended up fighting wars with the Mughals and the Ottomans over religion and control of trade routes. And you can see that it could be difficult because over here, if you're on the map, you've got the Mughal Empire over there, you've got the Ottoman Empire over there, and the Safavids are kind of sandwiched in the middle. Women in the Safavid Empire did participate in society. They are still veiled, they've got to wear the veil, and their movements are restricted, but they do have certain Islamic rights like inheritance and the right to a divorce. All right, Mughal India. Here's your summary. Mughal India builds on the developments of the Delhi Sultanate. So once again, it is a Muslim kingdom ruling over India. So Babur, the first conqueror, conquered most of northern India. He settles down and decides we're not going to be a nomad anymore. We're going to have a settled empire here. Akbar was one of its most successful leaders. Eventually, Mughal India becomes the richest state in the world. And you should consider Googling a picture of the Taj Mahal, which is constructed during the Mughal Dynasty. It's very, very beautiful. They also use the Indian Ocean and land-based trade to expand their empire and become richer. As we learned before, I think we looked at Hinduism, castes are still important. And it's interesting because even though it's a Muslim conqueror that takes over and the caste system is Hindu, it doesn't go away even when there's a Muslim leader. So the Brahmins are on top, and then the Kshatriyas, and then the Vaishyas, and then the Shudras. And then there's a group that's kind of outside the caste system called Dalits, and they sort of do the lowest of the low jobs. They're still Hindu, but they're almost considered like outside of the social system. They do all the worst jobs. So these gunpowder empires eventually decline. The summary is that gunpowder empires decline as internal and external threats overwhelm them. The Ottoman Empire declines because they lose a big battle called the Battle of Lepanto against some European countries. And then also they've got a lot of trouble figuring out who is going to be the next ruler of the Ottoman Empire. There's a common practice among Ottoman emperors of killing their brothers and their brothers' kids and anybody who could possibly be a future leader. And then when the Ottoman ruler dies, there's kind of this mad scramble for power to see who's going to be the person who's the next person in charge. So there's always lots of claimants. The rulers of the Ottoman Empire often have multiple wives, and they've got lots of kids, and the kids are all like, I should be king, no, I should be king, and I should rule the empire. And again, king called the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. And so there's lots of different groups that are trying to have power, and the Sultan kind of loses authority little by little. The Ottoman Empire also loses out because they don't go out and get colonies when Europe starts to. So in the really 15, 16, 17, 1800s, Europe goes out and conquers parts of North and South America, conquers most of Africa, and is little by little sort of increasing its wealth. And the Ottomans are not colonizing, they're not industrializing, their weapons become outdated, and they kind of get stuck. The Safavids also decline. It says over here, decadent court. That basically means that the people who are in charge of running the country are focusing more on their own interests and having a good time, and things are declining, and they're not paying attention to the administration of the empire. Also, the Shia government is in charge. They're Shia Muslims, but there also are Sunnis in their empire, and they don't really like being ruled by Shias, and so there's revolts there. Their tax systems start to fail, and when your tax system fails, your revenue falls, you can't fund your army, and then it's hard to have an army when you can't pay your soldiers. The Mughals also decline with their last great emperor. So he's the last great one, but then also decline starts to set in. He makes the empire less tolerant, and you can imagine if you're a Muslim empire in a majority Hindu area and you become less tolerant of Hindus, they're going to revolt against you. And as that empire starts to fall apart and as different parts of South Asia start to rebel, the British show up because they are colonizing and they've got new nice weapons, and kind of little by little they pick apart the empire and take over. So that's it for 3.1, and you'll see a next video for 3.2.